The first time Marcus Hale saw the twin suns climb the silver towers of Verx Prime, he thought they looked like a pair of welding arcs arguing with the skyline. Every morning they rose in tandem, scorching light that snapped off glass and chromium, and every morning he told the tower's maintenance AI to stop complaining. Yes, I know the thermal expansion is outside spec. No, I will not file a grievance against the suns. The AI whirred, unconvinced. The building's bones groaned. The day sharpened until it could cut. The palace perched at the city's apex like a needle threaded through a cloud. From there, the royal spire conducted power to half the hemisphere, a choir of superconductors hidden behind muraled walls and ceremonial arches. Marcus lived in the belly of that music, among humming conduits and the scent of ionized air, where the floor plates vibrated with the slow pulse of energy leaving the planet's heart. He did not belong to the court, not really. He belonged to blueprints and patched firmware, and the universal human law that anything can be fixed if you glare at it long enough. Princess Lyrian frequented the machinery the way a pianist visits the backstage piano to put her cheek against the wood. She was taller than Marcus by a head, luminous in a way that made him conscious of the smudges on his sleeves, and her ears, long, tapered, elegantly ridged, caught the tremble of the conduits the way sails catch wind. They said her lineage had been tuned over generations to hear subsonic resonance, to feel the shape of a city the way others feel the shape of a room. She listened to the palace, and the palace listened back. "Your grid is in pain," she said that morning, stepping over a coil of fiber like a dancer crossing a spotlight. "It strains when the suns align. The frequencies overlap." "Everything strains when the suns align," Marcus said, tightening a junction, "including my patience, Madge Lyrian." He was still learning to cut the honorific when she asked, "I'll retime the phase locks. We'll trick the harmonics into thinking it's a cooler day." "That sounds like lying." "It is exactly lying," he said, "but with math." Her smile was a small bright hinge. "Then lie well." He would have if the palace had remained a palace and not abruptly decided to demonstrate the educational value of high-energy physics in enclosed spaces. The first explosion struck somewhere below, a concussive argument that rattled the scaffolds and boomed up the ventilators. Lights shivered. The AI spluttered into emergency mode so loudly he told it to breathe into a paper bag. On the screens, security glyphs bloomed like bruised flowers, radiating out from the royal barracks. "Ku," Lyrian said softly, as if naming a weather pattern. Her ears rose, tips angling toward sounds he could not hear. "The guard." "Your guard." Marcus blinked at the symbols, access overrides, armory doors blooming open like iron lilies. "That's extremely not their job." A second blast chopped the corridor lights into a stutter. Distant shouts braided with the sting of alarms. Smoke began to smudge the clean air, metallic and mean. Marcus grabbed his tool pack. "Not a weapon, but a heavier thing than fear." "Protocol says you evacuate with the court to the suborbital shelters," he said, already knowing how useless protocol would be. The shelter elevator symbols flickered red, denied. Lyrian's head tilted. Her eyes weren't frightened, they were listening. "They are coming, not for the throne room, for me." She turned and the motion sent a ripple through the light along the delicate ridges of her ears. "Will you run, engineer?" He did a quick assessment of his life choices, which took 1 second and a sigh. "I'll run toward the problem. It's a personality flaw." He yanked open a floor panel and hauled up a coil of emergency fiber. "We can get to the throne chamber through the service shafts. If we beat them there, we can improvise." "Improvise," she repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar spice. "It's like lying," he said, slinging the coil, "but with screws." They dropped into the shaft as smoke began to accumulate in the corridor like a slow black tide. Inside the shaft, the world was ladder rungs and the tang of ozone. The palace's mechanical voice muttered to itself about fire containment and pressure seals until Marcus snapped, "Use your indoor voice," and it obediently lowered its volume. Lyrian moved with easy precision, descending like a whisper. Marcus thumped like a very determined sack of meat. The access hatch to the throne level refused his override. He sang to it in maintenance code, pressing fingers to cool metal, listening to relays click in distant guts. "Come on, old friend. I bought you that patch last solstice. Don't be ungrateful." The hatch hesitated, then slid aside with the reluctant sigh of a door agreeing to one last favor. They emerged onto a balcony above the great hall, a place for musicians on ceremonial days and maintenance on all other days. Below, the throne chamber was a storm of shadows and laser-line geometry. The silver dais gleamed in a wash of emergency light. Between the pillars, a knot of royal guards in dark armor moved like razors. Their crests glinted. Their faces were still. At their center, Lyrian's captain, General Sieros, the man who had sworn his life to her father and then to her, stood with his hands clasped behind his back as if reviewing a parade. The throne was empty. The banners hung straight as blades. Marcus's mind tallied tools. 30 meters of fiber, 3 omnisockets, a micro-welder, 3 maintenance drones in dock under the balcony, the palace's endless appetite for commands. He also tallied the guards' plasma carbines and the fact that he had all the armor of a credible lunch. Humor, then, his oldest insulation. "On the bright side," he whispered, "the floor polish is excellent. If we fall, we'll at least slide stylishly." Lyrian's mouth tightened. She had been composed in maintenance bays and diplomatic summits alike. Now her breath snared on the edges of something like grief. "Marcus," she said, and the use of his name without title put a hand on his shoulder in a way she never had. "You do not have to." He didn't let her finish. He crawled along the balcony to the drone dock and popped the panel. The drones were repair spiders, not built for war. Squat spheres with tool legs and a habit of complaining. He woke them with a surge, keyed a quick patch, and watched their status lights blink from maintenance blue to a doubtful amber. I know," he muttered. "You're pacifists. Today you are pacifists with opinions." Below, footsteps approached the side entrance, the one from the service corridors. Sieros lifted his head, listening. "Bring her," he said, and the words pushed cold into the room like winter. "She comes here or the city burns." Lyrian's fingers found the balcony rail. The metal sang a thin note Marcus could not hear. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them they were distances away. "If I walk to him," she said, "the coup is complete. If I run, they will set the grid to riot. They will say I caused it. My people will suffer." "Or," Marcus said, "we redefine suffering." He fed commands into the palace's ancient bones, choosing a maintenance routine that pulsed the hall's air cyclers, then spliced his fiber into the overhead array. New plan. We introduce General Sieros to the joy of an unexpected breeze. "What? Trust me," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. He counted 3, slapped the execute, and the hall's ventilation roared to full in an instant. Banners snapped like offended serpents. Dust devils strutted across the polished floor. The guards staggered, leveling their weapons upward toward a threat that was only air. Marcus hit the drone command. The spiders launched from their dock with the unfashionable grace of appliances attempting ballet. They scuttled under the balcony and dropped like iron fruit. As they fell, their tool legs snapped outward, latching onto tapestries and light fixtures, yanking them down in a ragged curtain. The hall dissolved into fluttering cloth and the ungainly flail of chandeliers. Maintenance wasn't supposed to include dodging plasma bolts, Marcus called, because humor sometimes needs witnesses. He grabbed Lyrian's hand. Her palm was warm, steady. They slid a service ladder to the floor, the polished surface obliging them with a perfect, ridiculous glide that ended behind a toppled pillar. Shouts erupted. Bolts seared the air, sizzling little arguments with the world. Marcus ducked and shoved a spider toward the base of the dais. "Target, arrogance," he told it. The drone chirped, extended a welder, and fused the general's boots to the floor with an economy that earned a bark of laughter from Lyrian despite everything. Ciro's tore free with a crack that echoed like a broken oath. His eyes found them in the chaos. "Engineer," he said, voice cold through the helmet. "Step aside." Marcus stepped in front of Lyrian. The movement surprised him for how easy it was, how natural. "You'll have to file a maintenance request for that murder," he said. "Triplicate forms. Very tedious." "Kill him," Ciro said. Time became a narrow hallway. The guards raised their carbines. Lyrian lifted her head and her ears flared, catching a sound no human could hear. The palace was still singing to her, even in panic. She inhaled, and the air around them took on a faint vibration, as if a note were pressed on the edge of hearing. Marcus felt it as a tickle on his teeth, a soft pressure behind his eyes. He didn't think. He moved. He yanked the fiber line he'd snaked into the overhead and jammed it into the hall's acoustic projectors, machines meant for ceremony and the occasional state opera. The resonance Lyrian carried in her bones leapt into the system like lightning into a wire. Sound, gentle, precise, utterly enormous, unfurled across the chamber. Banners thrashed. Glass sang until it cried. The guards' aim wavered, a chorus of armor buzzing at sympathetic frequencies. No one fell. No one died. But the world blurred, and in that blur Marcus and Lyrian ran. They slipped through the pillar forest, through the torn velvet and shattered light, across a floor so polished it might have been a memory. A door hissed, denied. Marcus smacked it with the heel of his hand and lied to it with all the math he had left. It opened, grudging and slow. They dove into the service passage and pulled it closed as bolts scorched its skin. Breathing like he'd run up 3 flights of gravity, Marcus leaned his head against the cool door. He waited for his hands to stop shaking, which they refused to do out of sheer principle. "Next time," he said, "we schedule the coup for after lunch. I'm better with blood sugar." Lyrian looked at him as if seeing a different species of light. The elegant points of her ears trembled, then stilled. "You stood between me and death." "I stood between you and very bad paperwork," he said, because jokes were armor and all his other armor had been fused to someone else's boots. Also death. Somewhere beyond the door, the palace shouted and the city answered. The grid throbbed, a beast waking to find a new rider on its back. Lyrian's hand hovered over the seam of the door as if she could feel the vibrations through molecules. "They will not rest. They will come again." "Good." Marcus wiped sweat from his brow and slung the tool pack higher, the straps biting comfortingly into his shoulders. "I have so many lies left to tell. And screws." He tilted his head toward the dim tunnel ahead, where conduits traced the darkness like constellations. "We go down, through the bones. We make the palace our accomplice." "You would make the palace complicit in treason." "I'd make gravity complicit if it signs the form," he said, and when she smiled, a thin, brave spark, the sound of it seemed to settle the corridor by a fraction of a heartbeat. They moved. Behind them, the royal hall reassembled its dignity with the offended sniffs of an aristocrat forced to attend a street performance. Ahead, machines whispered in old dialects, and the twin suns pushed their arguments against the towers until the towers, stubborn and glittering, held. The palace was alive with panic. Its walls vibrated with orders, counterorders, and the soft electric hum of systems unsure which master they served. Marcus Hale and Princess Lyrian sprinted through a service corridor that seemed to stretch forever, lit by strobes of crimson emergency glow. Their shadows lengthened and warped against the alloy walls, twin phantoms running for a future that had just betrayed them. "Remind me," Marcus gasped, "is this the part of the royal tour where we get shot at, or is that an upgrade package?" Lyrian's voice came out calm, infuriatingly calm. "You talk too much for someone with limited oxygen." "I'm human," he said. "If I stop talking, my species might revoke my citizenship." Behind them, footsteps. The metallic thud of boots that had once guarded her chambers, now hunting her. Lyrian glanced back once, then pulled Marcus by the sleeve into a lateral shaft. It was dark, narrow, and smelled faintly of ozone and hot circuits. The perfect place to die inconveniently, Maintenance tunnels, Marcus muttered. Ah yes, the 5-star escape route of kings and fools. Lyrian knelt beside a junction box, her fingers dancing over the touchpads. The gentle luminescence that always lived beneath her skin flared slightly. Her long ears quivered, as though tasting the electrical frequencies. I can feel them, she whispered. They've overridden the palace's AI. It doesn't know who it serves anymore. Marcus crouched beside her. Don't take it personally. Half my tools rebel after one firmware update. She gave him a sharp look, but the corner of her lips betrayed amusement. The tunnel quaked. A pressure door somewhere below slammed shut with enough force to make dust fall like gray snow. Cieros, she said, just his name, but it carried the cold weight of realization. The general. The traitor. Well, Marcus said, at least you can fire him without paperwork now. They pressed forward through the dark. The tunnel opened into the central vent shaft, where the city's artificial winds howled through turbines the size of ships. A catwalk curved along one side, thin as a ribbon, vibrating with every gust. Marcus's engineering instincts screamed, but Lyrian was already stepping out onto it, perfectly balanced. You're enjoying this, he said, following with all the grace of a terrified walrus. I'm surviving it, she answered. Enjoyment would involve wine. The walkway trembled under their weight. Below them, the turbine blades spun with lazy menace. Each was engraved with the royal sigil, a detail Marcus found deeply ironic, given that they could now kill the royal heir by simple accident. He kept his eyes forward, muttering prayers to the gods of physics and poor design choices. A voice crackled over the calm grid, Cieros's voice amplified, sharp as a blade. Lyrian, surrender yourself. Spare the city the chaos your defiance will bring. Lyrian stopped. Her back straightened, her silhouette etched in the flickering light. You've already brought chaos, she said, her voice carrying through the comm system like a whisper amplified by resolve. You have no right to speak of sparing anyone. Marcus sighed. Great, he can hear us, we can hear him. It's like a bad, long-distance relationship. Lyrian tilted her head, the faintest smile ghosting her lips. You're remarkably calm. I'm panicking professionally, he said. Years of practice. A distant clank echoed above them. Marcus looked up just in time to see a drone, one of the palace's security models, descending along the vent shaft. Its targeting lights painted the catwalk in red dots. Ah, company. Lyrian reached for the energy baton at her belt, but Marcus held out a hand. Let me. He pulled out his multi-tool, a patchwork of scavenged components, duct tape and pure human audacity, and flicked open a small interface blade. Time to introduce this drone to human engineering. Step 1, confuse it. Step 2, insult it. Step 3, pray. He jacked into the nearest maintenance port. The system screamed in a language of beeps and static. Sparks leapt, a shower of tiny stars in the dark. The drone froze midair, uncertain, its sensors twitching. What did you do? Lyrian asked. I taught it irony, Marcus said. It's experiencing an existential crisis. The drone spun in a slow, graceful spiral and crashed into the turbine housing with a sound like thunder. Metal shrieked. The airflow changed direction briefly, then stabilized. Marcus exhaled. See, that's the power of sarcasm. Lyrian gave him a look that might have been admiration, or disbelief, or both. You are an unusual man. I prefer limited edition. They reached the end of the catwalk. A door marked restricted, energy core access blinked faintly. Lyrian placed her palm against the reader. The lock hesitated, uncertain whom to obey, then opened. Inside, the air thrummed with the pulse of raw energy, the planetary grid's heart, encased in shimmering coolant coils and bright conduits. This is the core that powers the entire hemisphere, Marcus said softly. You could light half the galaxy or fry a city block from here. Lyrian nodded. And Cieros will try to use it to crush what remains of the Loyalists. We can't let him have control. Marcus rubbed his temples. Let me guess. We're going to sabotage the most important power system in the known sector using What optimism and duct tape? You said you were an engineer. But I also said I like being alive. She turned to him then, closer than before. Her gaze was steady, her voice low. If you stand with me now, you will have the gratitude of an entire people. And if I do, you'll still have my gratitude, she said, but the city will burn. He sighed, long and theatrical. You're terrible at negotiation. Fine, I'll save your planet. Thank you, Marcus Hale of Earth. Don't thank me yet. I still have no idea what I'm doing. He began reconfiguring the grid protocols, muttering under his breath as he worked. The system responded sluggishly at first, then began to yield, like a stubborn beast tamed by persistence and profanity, unreadable as if trying to decipher the strange human rhythm of swearing and improvisation. Explain this, duct tape, she said at last. It's the foundation of our civilization, he replied. Hold ships together, marriages, entire governments. A faint laugh escaped her, brief but genuine. It startled him more than the explosions. They worked in sync after that, she listening to the harmonic fluctuations, he bending the system's logic to his will. When Cirrus's override codes tried to seize control, Lyrian's voice cut through the chaos. Now, Marcus hit execute. The grid flashed, then splintered into protected subroutines. The energy core glowed brighter, stabilized. Cirrus's transmission cut off mid-command. For a moment, silence. Then Lyrian leaned against the console, exhaling. You did it. I usually do, Marcus said, though usually I just fix elevators. Perhaps you were meant for more. Yeah, he said, glancing at the energy storm pulsing before them. Like heart attacks. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them, many marching in rhythm. Lyrian's eyes hardened. Marcus closed his toolkit with a snap. Guess we're not done. No, she said. We're just beginning. Marcus groaned. That's what heroes say right before everything explodes. And somewhere deep in the palace, something did explode. The lights flickered, and both of them started running again. One laughing, the other cursing. Both equally alive in the storm they had made together. The corridor spat them into the underbelly of the spire, where the palace's elegance surrendered to bare struts, sweating pipes, and the warm breath of machines. Heat shimmered in the air like the ghost of a sun. Coolant dripped from a fractal of valves into a grating rhythm that could have been a heartbeat if hearts were made of tin. Marcus Hale paused long enough to recalibrate a sensor with his thumb, and to tell gravity that it owed him an apology. You always talk to physics? Lyrian asked, her long ears tilting to catch the hidden hums that threaded the darkness. The ridges along each ear glimmered faintly as if they remembered royal light. Only when it's being rude, he said. It rarely answers, which is good because then I'd need a therapist. Voices chased them down the cross tunnel, not close but not confused either. The guard were learning the layout. Lyrian put a hand to the wall and closed her eyes. Her brow smoothed. The palace vibrated through her bones. The city's grid ran a careful finger along her spine. When she opened her eyes, their blue had cooled to calculation. Left, she said, then down. The resonators in the southern waste ducts are out of tune. We can hide in the discord. I can read the dissonance better than they can. I'm delighted to be guided by your ears, Marcus said, then winced. That sounded better in my head. It sounded honest, she said, and moved. They took the left-hand passage into a forest of vertical pipes. The temperature dropped from furnace to brisk bath. Frost fumed from a ruptured coolant line, smearing the air with silver fog. Marcus slapped a clamp on the tier as he passed, more reflex than plan. Future me will thank me. I'll send him a fruit basket. Is fruit a human currency? Lyrian asked, ducking under a cable knot. We tend to prefer oaths and minerals. Fruit is an edible oath, he said, also an apology. The southern waste ducts were a latticework of echoes. Sound lapped in layers, fan housings complained in musical thirds. Lyrian's ears drew taut like bowstrings. She nudged Marcus toward a maintenance alcove that smelled like solder and leftover coffee. He'd left the mug there a week ago, resigned it to the gods, and now reclaimed it as a relic. The alcove had a narrow window onto a loading bay that opened into the undercity, a yawning chasm of scaffolds lit by bioluminescent moss and 1,000 illegal lanterns. "Welcome to the part of the city that isn't on the brochures," Marcus said. "Mind your step, the stairs have opinions." Voices rose in the bay, not the guard this time, dockhands, tinkers, the scratch of street merchants, laughter forced low by fear. Lyrian peered through the slit. For a heartbeat she was purely the princess again, spine straight, gaze steady, worry contained in a vessel labeled duty. Her ears twitched twice, quick as a thought. "They know," she said. "Rumors outrun boots. Word that the guard turned. Word that I'm dead." She swallowed, a tiny movement that somehow jarred the entire alcove. "If they see me alive, they may be hunted for it. If they see you alive, they may also remember they're not alone." Marcus picked up the abandoned mug, sniffed it, made a face, and set it down like a bomb. "I vote for statistically dangerous hope." The bay's side door creaked inward on its own schedule. A hunched figure slipped in, carrying a bag of components that clinked like small, hopeful coins. She turned and saw them. There was a naked second in which 3 lives tried on a dozen futures. Then the woman, gray hair in tight braids, grease on her cheeks bowed, so deeply her bag of parts tilted and spilled a handful of shining screws. "High one," she whispered, and put a finger to her lips without straightening. Her eyes flickered to the corners, counting unseen ears. "You're supposed to be dust." "Not today," Lyrian said, slipping from the alcove. "What is your name?" "Vexa. I replace things the palace forgot." Vexa's glance took in Marcus's tool pack and added him to a wary ledger. "Also, I gossip with pipes." "A noble art," Marcus said. "I tried it in college." Vexa jerked her chin toward a stack of crates. "If you're headed down into the Undercity, you'll need to smell less like ceremony." She dug out a battered cloak that might once have been black before it argued with a solvent. She draped it over Lyrian. "Hide those ears." "I cannot," Lyrian said gently. "They are attached." "Then hide their story," Vexa said, tugging the hood until shadows pooled around the points. "There, now you look like trouble instead of destiny." Bootsteps clanged above. Vexa's face altered in the way of people who knew how to change faces. "The guards sweep," she said. "They've learned the old service maps, but not the new mistakes." She led them along a catwalk so thin Marcus walked it sideways, mumbling about liability. It emptied into a freight lift that had spun a wheel bearing until it sang a lullaby of imminent failure. He popped the panel and made the sign of the cross in a religion consisting solely of tightening things. The lift shuddered, exhaled, and allowed itself to descend. The Undercity unfolded like an inside-out flower, levels upon levels, connected by stairways that had never met a safety inspector. Stalls clung to railings. Children chased a drone that had decided it was a kite. A chorus of smells, ozone, frying rootcakes, coolant, starship soap, met them like an unhelpful friend. Everywhere, screens muttered palace news. An accident at the spire, an unavoidable transition of command. Lyrian's jaw tightened until it could have been used to cut rope. "Keep your head down," Vexa said, "and keep moving. You have a gravity to you that draws eyes." "I've been trying to dye it," Marcus said. They wound through aisles of scavenged brilliance. Helix antennae soldered from broken music boxes, algae lamps hacked to glow in stubborn colors. A stall selling programmable spices that made your tongue remember rain. A boy offered Lyrian a handful of glass beads. She placed them back in his hand and folded his fingers over them. "Hold your light," she said, and the boy's smile was a flare in a tunnel. A knot of armored figures appeared at the far end of the mezzanine. Not guard, mercenaries, hired by someone who didn't mind noise. Their helmets were open to the air, and the air did not approve. The leader saw Lyrian, or saw the way the crowd leaned around her and barked an order. "Subtle, like a meteor," Marcus said. "Any suggestions?" "I can make the air shake," Lyrian said, "but not without throwing them into the people. Then we'll out-bureaucrat them." He ducked behind a vendor's stall loaded with antique interface plugs. "Excuse me, sir, I'm commandeering your adapters in the name of panic." The vendor blinked slowly, took in Lyrian's hood and Lyrian herself, and nodded as if someone had told him a bedtime story that finally made sense. "Take cable. Leave coin. Done." Marcus found the mezzanine's public address panel, a relic installed to tell people about sales on nutrient buns, and jacked in with a cable so old it might have remembered childhood. He fed it a command no honest system would accept. It accepted. The Undercity speakers popped and then warmed like sleeping giants. "Attention shoppers," Marcus's voice boomed from every corner, down stairwells, up vents. "In accordance with Section 97 of the Totally Real, and not at all fabricated municipal code, mercenary presence on Level 4 must present Form 11B Declaration of Intent to be menacing. In triplicate. Failure to comply results in fines, community service, and public mockery." Laughter rippled in the crowd, nervous at first, then genuine. The mercenaries hesitated for that human fraction of a second in which people decide whether they are ridiculous. Marcus used the second like a crowbar. He triggered the emergency foam system and told it, in the voice of a fire marshal, that Level 4 was currently composed of lava. Nozzles coughed. Foam geysered from the ceiling in a white avalanche. It cascaded over the mercenaries, who flailed like statues being baptized. It piled knee-high across the mezzanine, squeaked beneath boots, swallowed shins, converted menace into slapstick with the speed of a good joke. "Go," Vexa hissed, pushing Lyrian into the wobbling chaos. Through the noodle stall left at the counterfeit cometary, down the ladder painted with stars. "I'll misplace your footprints." They wove through foam and laughter, dodging a bowl of noodles that insisted on participating in the plot. At the ladder, Lyrian paused, turned back to Vexa and clasped her hands. "If I live, I will rebuild your bearings and your street and all the roofs that leak." "If you live," Vexa said, "you will be expected to do more than roofs." Then, softer, "but start with roofs. People sleep under them." They descended into a quieter layer of the city, where the lights thinned and the walls wore the patient stains of years. A door waited in a brick arch. After a moment's consideration, it decided to open for them. Inside, a room the size of a promise. A table, a wall of patched screens, a map of the city drawn in conductive ink that pulsed faintly where people gathered like fireflies. A man looked up from the table. Scar across his cheek, smile like a password passed hand to hand. "Engineer," he said to Marcus, "you owe me a filter from last winter." "If I didn't owe you something," Marcus said, "you'd assume I was an imposter." The man's eyes flicked to Lyrian. He did not bow, he nodded as if acknowledging a weather front. "High one," he said. "You're late." "Your city detained me," she said, and some humor seeped into her tone like tea into hot water. He gestured to the map. "We're the ones who didn't believe the comms. We've been listening to the wrong frequencies. Welcome to the right ones." The screens showed storming footage, the spire, its crown lit in harsh military white. The announcement of a transitional council with Cieros in the center, wearing the neutrality of a knife. But in the corners of the screen, in the chatters, in the whispered bandwidths between sanctioned channels, a different story propagated. A human engineer standing between a princess and a firing line, the drones turned into clowns with welders, the palace itself confused into mercy. "Legends have poor quality control," Marcus said, staring at his own myth. "Legends keep people warm," the man replied. "We need warmth. We have a cold week ahead." Lyrian stepped to the city map. Her fingers hovered over the conductive ink, not touching, listening. Her ears tilted, the ridges glowed. She found the pulse of gatherings, the tremor of fear, the beating hearts of alleys waiting to decide themselves. "We can't meet the guard head-on," she said. "They have the armories and the loudspeakers. We have the harmonics." Marcus leaned over, tapping at junctions. "And the hardware. The grid's still partitioned the way we left it. We can shape outages, ripple their comms, give neighborhoods power when the palace tries to starve them of light." He rubbed his jaw. "And we can build. Build what? The man asked. A proof of life, Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his throat. A network that isn't theirs, duct tape and defiance, resonance and rumor. Will make the city hum a song it remembers. Lyrian's eyes met his. Their shared grin was small, private, and very tired. It still contained enough light to start a machine. I can sing, she said. I can lie with math, he said. And I, said the man with the scar, can find people who remember how to be roofs. The room breathed. The city mapped itself into hands. Somewhere far above, the twin suns burned the towers the way truth burns through a lie if you give it time and a little luck. Somewhere not far enough, Ceros sharpened an order. Down in the Undercity, a boy counted glass beads, and a woman named Vexa swore at an air duct until it obeyed. And in a room that smelled of solder and new plans, a human and a princess set their palms on different sides of the same electricity and began. The fourth day of the coup rose gray and metallic, with the sun half swallowed by the smoke of distant bombardments. The city of Verx Prime had stopped pretending to be orderly. Its towers blinked like tired eyes, its skyways crackled with static, and from the depths of the Undercity came the rhythm of defiance disguised as machinery. Marcus Hale stood over a hollow flickering between hope and malfunction, and decided, not for the first time, that revolutions should come with clearer instruction manuals. I've rerouted the southern grid, he said, gesturing at a glowing schematic that was either a map or an accidental work of abstract art. If my math is right, and it usually isn't, we can give the rebels power for 6 hours before the palace AI notices. Lyrian watched the flickering projection. 6 hours is long enough to light the streets, long enough for the people to see one another again. Also long enough to electrocute me if I sneeze too hard, Marcus added. It's the small victories that matter. She gave him a look that was half amusement, half exhaustion. You complain like a philosopher. I complain like a man who's been awake for 30 hours and living on algae bars that taste like regret. Across the room, the man with the scar, now their de facto liaison to the resistance, snorted. Regret is nutritious. That's how you know it's real food. They were hiding in what had once been a transit control hub, deep beneath the city's old Magrel lines. The walls pulsed faintly with residual energy, like veins remembering the heartbeat of trains that no longer came. Around them, a patchwork army of mechanics, scavengers, and data smugglers worked with quiet urgency. Drones whirred, transmitting coded signals disguised as maintenance updates. The rebellion was becoming a network. Lyrian leaned on the table, studying Marcus. When this began, you were an engineer. Now you're a strategist. He looked up from his circuit board. I'm still an engineer. I just learned that blowing things up also counts as maintenance. Her smile was quick, unguarded. Then maintain my kingdom a little longer. He saluted her with a screwdriver. With pleasure, your radiant resistor. She tilted her head. Is that a title or an insult? Depends on whether we survive. Their banter was interrupted by an alarm tone, 3 rising notes that meant company. The resistance scrambled into action. The scarred man cursed under his breath. Palace patrol, incoming, armored transports. Scanning frequencies look civilian, but the timing's too clean. Marcus slid behind the console and tapped into the city's optical net. The feed stuttered, then revealed the unmistakable insignia of Ceros's new transitional guard. Their mechs lumbered through the streets, sleek and cruel, repurposed from industrial loaders and painted in the Empire's pale silver. Lyrian's jaw set. They mean to make an example of the South District. Good news, Marcus said, fingers flying. We've got more drones than sense. He patched into the maintenance network, waking dozens of drones that had been sleeping under false IDs. Some were janitorial, some agricultural. One appeared to have been a party decoration with an overactive sound system. They rose from alleys and rooftops like a swarm of metallic insects. What are you doing? The scarred man asked. Saving the day, or creating a mildly interesting distraction, possibly both. On the streets above, the drones descended. The mechs looked up just in time to be showered with fluorescent paint, spare parts, and what Marcus later described as improvised confetti warfare. Sensors blinked uselessly through the mess. One drone, the party relic, blared a human pop song that had somehow survived centuries of interstellar travel. The resistance burst into laughter. Even Lyrian smiled, a rare, unguarded kind of smile that seemed to lighten the entire chamber. You turned maintenance tools into jesters. Comedy is just applied chaos, Marcus said. We're buying time, use it. Lyrian nodded and moved toward the comm array. Her voice, amplified across the secret network, carried through static and rebellion alike. People of Verx Prime, she said, steady and clear. They tell you I am dead. If so, then this city speaks from the grave. If I live, it is because of you and one remarkably irritating human. Marcus looked up. I resent that irritating wasn't in a positive context. But her words spread faster than his sarcasm. Across the sectors, people gathered by the lights flickering back to life, tiny beacons powered by stolen energy. The legend of the human engineer and the betrayed princess grew stronger with every relay. Hours later, when the patrols withdrew and the tunnels quieted, Marcus sat with Lyrian by the humming conduit. He was exhausted beyond reason. You realize, he said, that we've just declared open war. I realize, she said softly, that you've given them laughter again. That's rarer than power. He tilted his head back against the metal wall. If we win, I'm taking a vacation on a planet that doesn't have politics or plumbing. That would be a void, she said. You'd last a minute. I'd bring snacks. Her laugh was soft but real. For a while neither spoke. The conduit glowed gently between them, its rhythm steady like a shared pulse. Then Lyrian stood. We strike the palace next, before Ciros tightens his control. Marcus groaned. You mean the heavily guarded fortress full of angry soldiers and malfunctioning AI systems? Yes. Excellent. I'll bring the duct tape. You always do. The scarred man approached. We've got sympathizers inside the upper spire, maintenance crews, a few loyal officers. If you can reach the central core, we can shut down their weapon systems. Marcus looked at Lyrian. And here I thought I was the only fool volunteering for suicide missions. She extended her hand. If we die standing. He clasped it. That's reassuringly dramatic. The plan was set. At dawn, they would move through the old lift tunnels, using the same maintenance codes Marcus once used to fix royal air filters. Now he would use them to break a regime. He didn't like the odds, but he liked the alternative less. That night, as they prepared the tools, Marcus recorded one last log into his wrist terminal. Note to self: if humanity ever gets invited to another alien monarchy, politely decline. Also, buy better insulation for courage. Lyrian caught him smiling at the message. What did you write? Just a memo to the future, he said, assuming it still has a sense of humor. She touched the side of the console, her long ears twitching to the faint hum of the machines. Then we'll build one that does. And somewhere deep beneath the ruins of power, an engineer and an exiled princess began their final climb toward the spire, armed with tools, laughter, and a very human refusal to surrender to anything, even destiny. They climbed the old lift shaft in breadths and inches, the world a vertical line of rungs, the metal cold with the memory of better days. Marcus Hale's palms burned and his shoulders sang protest songs in unison. Above them, the spire's core pulsed, blue-white heartbeat muffled by layers of ceremony and treason. Lyrian moved like a note traveling up a scale, steady, precise. Her long ears angled to unheard guideposts. The ridges glimmered when the frequencies she trusted were near. You know, Marcus whispered, if we survive, I'm filing an ergonomic complaint against your architecture. Filed and stamped, she said, not out of breath at all. Compensation, one sunrise. I require a fruit basket. An edible oath, approved. They reached the maintenance hatch at the level just below the throne chamber. The panel had been upgraded since Marcus's last encounter with it. CROs had good engineers and worse intentions. Marcus cracked his knuckles and unpacked a nest of cables, adapters, and optimism. "All right, door. Time for you to experience personal growth." A spark, a fizz, a rude buzz from the lock that sounded like laughter. Marcus reprogrammed a handshake protocol into a handshake invitation and slipped a command through the gap. The panel beeped in reluctant respect and opened a palm's width. Lyrian slid her fingers into the seam and hummed, a low resonance that stroked hidden relays. The hatch sighed. The palace remembered her voice, even if it had been ordered to forget. They slipped into the spinal corridor. The air smelled like polished metal and lies. At its end, the central core doors loomed, etched with royal equations describing balance and stewardship. Someone had carved a new sigil across them, Ciros's clean, angular mark. Marcus muttered, "We should charge him for vandalism." Two figures waited at the doors, not guards. The man with the scar stepped out of the shadow and Vexa emerged beside him, wiping grease on a rag as if they'd interrupted her mid-argument with a turbine. "You weren't invited," Marcus whispered, the relief hitting him like caffeine. "We invited ourselves," the scarred man said. "Your network carried more than rumors." Vexa jerked her chin at Lyrian. "You keep walking, we'll misplace your pursuers." "Vexa," Lyrian said, and the name held "thank you, forgive me, and don't die." "Roofs first," Vexa said, "then morals." Footsteps rattled the corridor close. The scarred man tossed Marcus a palm-sized puck. "Gift from the South District, press and throw." Marcus pressed. The puck bloomed into a cloud of projectors that stitched a moving image of an empty hallway over the real one. The first squad of guards sprinted past, chasing a mirage. Vexa cackled. "Go," she said, like a blessing. They went. The corridors recognized Lyrian's pattern at last and folded apart. Inside, the city's heart beat in an atrium of light. Conduits braided upward into the royal spire like the vascular system of a god. In the center, the control dais waited, a circle of interfaces, acoustic projectors, and the ceremonial crown socket for royal harmonics. General Ciros stood at its edge, helmet tucked under his arm, his hair silvering at the temples like a flag surrendering to wind. Around him, a ring of loyalists in pristine armor held their weapons with the efficient sadness of men who believed they were saving the world by breaking it. "Lyrian," Ciros said. It came out not as a greeting, but as a verdict. "You should have died like a legend. Instead, you live like a problem." Marcus stepped in front of her. "Good morning, your transitionalness. We're here for the part where you realize a coup is just a really expensive performance review." Ciros's gaze flicked to Marcus, took his measure, filed him under annoying with an underline. "Engineer, step aside." "I tried that once," Marcus said. "Didn't take." Lyrian's voice cut clean through the charged air. "You pledged yourself to my father and to me. You pledged yourself to the people. Which oath did you choose to betray?" "The future," Ciros said, and there was something like pain under the frost of command. "Verk's prime stagnates. The old harmonics keep us listening to ourselves until we hear nothing else. The guard is the hand that adapts, or we are the throat that drowns. I chose the hand." "And closed it," she said, "around the city's neck." Weapons lifted. Marcus measured distances and frequencies and the number of screws he had left. He bent to the console, fingers hovering over interfaces he knew like scars. Ciros's hand twitched toward his sidearm. Lyrian lifted her palm. "General, please. We can still turn this to law, not blood." Ciros hesitated, reflex of decades, then hardened it into refusal. "Law is the name we write on the knife after it has cut." "Then let us take the knife away," Marcus said, and hit execute. Across the atrium, the acoustic projectors hummed awake. He had rewritten their ceremonial software into a translation matrix. Lyrian's subsonic resonance mapped to patterns the machines could broadcast as force without injury. It would only work if she could hold the frequency precisely on the edge between pain and paralysis. No killing stroke, just a pause, long enough for reason to breathe. Lyrian stepped onto the dais. The crown socket unfurled like a metallic flower. She did not put it on her head. She placed her hands on the interface and closed her eyes. The ridges along her long ears brightened as if dawn had decided to reside there. She drew breath. He looked at Marcus then, a long, unlovely look that tried to place humanity inside a box labeled anomaly and failed. "What did they promise you?" he asked. "Riches? Titles? The novelty of being the clever animal at court?" "They promised me bad coffee and the chance to be useful," Marcus said. "I accepted both." Ciro's shoulders lowered by a fraction, the way a mountain lowers itself into weather. "Then arrest me," he said. "Do it with law. If you can find any left." "We'll make some," Marcus said, and for once he didn't make a joke out of it. They did not bind him with chain. The paralysis field faded, leaving muscles woolly, choices newly sharp. Lyrian signaled, and loyal officers, few but enough, stepped forward to escort their former commander to a cell that would later become a courtroom. There would be testimony. There would be charges. There would be work. The atrium exhaled. The city above answered, a ripple of word-of-mouth traveling faster than fiber. The palace systems gone quiet, the loudspeakers playing market songs, a princess alive and standing, a human who refused to step aside. By dusk, the transitional guard had become the transitional witnesses, and the royal spire had returned to being a needle threaded through a cloud, though now the thread ran both ways. Lyrian stood on the balcony of the great hall, not in a coronation robe but in the grease-stained cloak Vexa had given her, and spoke to the city through projectors tuned to warmth instead of volume. "We will not return to the old law," she said. "We will write a new one with hands that have known tools. We will tune our harmonics to the frequencies that pass through roofs." Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd of staff and loyalists, a smear of carbon on his cheek, a busted knuckle wrapped in real bandage for once instead of duct tape. He felt something rearranging in him, an internal machine clicking into alignment. He had come here to fix an energy grid and had somehow rewired himself. Vexa arrived with a bag of bearings and a grin that could chisel marble. She pressed a fruit into his palm, a round orange thing that glowed as if it had eaten a small sun. "An edible oath," she said, "and a receipt." The man with the scar leaned on the railing. "You're famous," he said to Marcus, as if announcing a minor leak. "That sounds unsanitary," Marcus said. "Do I get hazard pay?" "You get a job," Lyrian said, appearing beside him with the uncanny stealth of someone who had made an entire city listen. "Chief Steward of Systems and Stories." "That's not a real title." "It is now," she said. "You keep the lights on and the myths honest." He looked at the fruit, then at her, then at the city that had survived because it could be made to laugh and to listen in the same hour. "All right," he said quietly, "on one condition." "Name it." "Roofs first." "Roofs first," she agreed. A week later, Ciro stood before a tribunal composed of engineers, dockworkers, scholars, and a grandmother who had once built an antenna from knitting needles. He spoke of fear disguised as strategy, of duty fermented into certainty. He was sentenced not to exile but to labor, to rebuild the southern grid with the people he had planned to control, supervised by a woman who swore at air ducts until they obeyed. Vexa shook his hand and handed him a wrench heavy with forgiveness. The guard, reconstituted, traded their crests for service patches, and took an oath written in plain language that fit in the mouth without cutting. The palace AI, rebaptized with neighborhoods and names, learned to prefer questions over commands. The boy with the glass beads added 2 more to his string. 1 blue for power returned to his block, 1 gold for a rumor that became a law that became a promise. On a clear morning when the twin suns climbed the silver towers and decided not to argue, Marcus stood on a rooftop with Lyrian and watched the city lift its face. He had cleaned the grease off his sleeves and discovered it didn't feel like erasing himself. It felt like showing up. Beside him, Lyrian's long ears caught the breeze and translated it into a smile. You could go home, she said, not as an exile but as an invitation. I could, he said, then laughed at the shape the words made. But Earth doesn't have your ductwork. We have better fruit. True, he said, lifting the orange. But your people have learned to write apologies in roofs. I'm not done helping them edit. She nodded, and for a quiet moment the spire hummed with nothing more dangerous than contentment. Below, crews were bolting new panels onto a school. The hollow-table in the transit hub had been replaced by a long table where laws were drafted with coffee stains and arguments. The legend of the human who stood between a princess and death had settled into something sturdier than legend. Habit. When the first light of the second sun struck the crowned socket in the hall below, it flashed just once, as if the old symbol wanted to wave before retiring. Lyrian reached up and touched the air above Marcus's shoulder, not quite a blessing, more like a promise to keep promising. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said, holding up the fruit. "Help me eat this before bureaucracy finds a way to tax it." She laughed, and the laugh skipped across rooftops, found its way down into the undercity, ran a lap around the Magrill lines, and curled up to nap in the palace like a cat that had decided the furniture could stay. The city, having been ruled, betrayed, defended, and rewired, decided to do the most revolutionary thing available. It went on. And when